Yesterday, my friends, all around 37 years old, and I were changing in a gym locker room. It was just us and a couple of strangers. We were all just chatting and having a good time when two little boys walked in to use the bathrooms. They were in high spirits, running around and saying, "Hi, hi, hi, E," to all the grown men in the locker room as they passed by. We all smiled, said hi, and waved back as they went by. Cute kids, you know. A few minutes passed, and they came back through, running by and saying, "Hi, hi, hi," like before. We all smiled again, but this time I dropped some bass in my voice and, just messing around, shouted, "Settle down now." The sound resonated through the tiled locker room, and the boys immediately stopped, gave me this terrified look, like the fun was over, then ran out of the room. One of the men I didn't know, guessing he was a dad, was just smiling, laughing, and shaking his head when I told my friends, "Wow, I never knew I had a dad voice. I had never activated it before." I felt like Paul Atreides becoming Muad'Dib. I do feel bad for striking dad fear into those cute little dudes, but I was just clowning around. Shout out to all dads out there who have to lay down some law with that booming dad voice. I still remember the power it had over me as a kid, and now, as a single guy with no kids and no nieces or nephews, it was interesting to discover I had the power. Story 1. I am an indoor skydive instructor, and I had to instruct this kid's birthday party group of 7 to 8-year-old boys. The birthday boy wet his pants because he was a little scared. I gently told him to go to the bathroom, change, take a moment on the toilet, and then come back for a new flight suit. While he was gone, his friends started to make fun of him. I added some bass and volume to my voice and said, "We've all wet our pants once, so either we make fun of everyone or no one makes fun of him." It was quiet. No one said a thing. That's when I discovered the dad voice. They just looked at me with focus and slight fear until one of his friends screamed, "That's true. I wet my bed last night." Story 2. I think I developed it with my dog. It's awkward when I have to talk like that to people, because in the back of my mind I'm laughing out loud that I'm talking to him like a dog. Story 3. My son was 5 years old, playing outside. There were roads being repaved in the neighborhood, so some huge piles of dirt and sand for them to use were dumped. He was told he could play in the street, but explicitly not at the mound of dirt at the end of the street. After an hour or so, I checked on him. "No son, no gives." I followed the voices to, you guessed it, the mound of dirt at the end of the street. His yellow jacket was visible at the top. I bellowed from 100 meters away. "Full birth name. Get down from there right now." I saw him slide down, took my time in getting there, walked around the mound, and was greeted by 12 pairs of nervous, scared eyes. Dad voice was super effective. Story 4. I'm a mom, and our 4-year-old was acting out. My husband unleashed his dad voice. She dropped the attitude immediately, and I almost dropped my panties. It was hot. Story 5. Back when I was in the army, I was out on a field exercise and managed to get a hold of a phone to make a quick call to my kids. Their mom told me my son had been misbehaving since I was gone. So I told her to put him on the phone and gave him the whole little dad speech. "You will behave for your mother. Daddy is going to be back sooner or later, and you will not like what happens if I find out you were acting crazy while I was gone." After I got off the phone, a couple of my soldiers were staring at me, and one of them told me, "Holy shit, Sergeant. I feel like I need to call my mom and apologize for every time I misbehaved." Story 6. I was in Yellowstone. I came off a hike back into the base parking lot. There was a bull bison in the lot with a group of Chinese tourists closing in around it. I charged one of them and caught her camera strap, barely missing her neck. I started bellowing in a firm voice to get away. They froze. I yelled, "Move now," while flailing outward with my arms. People parted, and the bison fled through the gap. Told them they were idiots and went to my car. Contemplated the fact that I got 100 or more people to move on my command. Weird. Yes. Learned that large groups of people will respond to forceful commands. Story 7. My friends and I were sitting at a table hanging out. In the next room, My friend's little brother and some of his friends were running around and shouting. When his little brother ran by the door, I shouted, "Hey!" in an unintentionally stern voice. I was going to ask him to quiet down, but when I saw the fear in his eyes, I knew that saying anything would have only made it worse. He went on his way, and they were quiet for the rest of the night. Story 8. 18 years old was when I started using mine. Working with really young children was one of my first jobs. I loved having the chance since it afforded me the opportunity to test some of my own theories on how to raise children. I was like a part-time dad or an uncle before I knew what being an uncle would feel like. I do now. Story 9. Last year, I'm 28, prior military and back in college. I'm not a big guy, nice and friendly. Yelling is out of character for me, but I can use a commanding tone to get my point across. This dad voice just isn't something that I do often. I was on campus in an open study room. It's basically a large break room for students to work in. 5 of us adult students were in there doing homework and such. Several 16-year-old dual enrollment kids come in and start playing around, roughhousing, spinning their friend around in a chair, trying to climb on top of the vending machine, just being loud and disruptive in a place that was meant for work. I see that everyone who had been working was clearly annoyed. I had to use my grown-up voice. I don't call it a dad voice, since I'm not one. "Hey, cut that out. Are you high schoolers or college students?" They all stop and get quiet. One replied, "We go to the local high school." "Then why are you here? This is a college campus. People are clearly trying to work. We're dual enrollment, so we go here too. Then grow up and act like you are supposed to be here. This isn't a place for you to run around like children." 3 of them sat down and began working immediately. The loudest 2 just walked out. Only one apologized. I'm sure that I used it while I was still a non-commissioned officer, but this was the first time that I used it on kids. Story 10. It was 2007, I was in my mid-20s, and I was working at a coffee shop. These ladies were catching up with each other and chatting away while one of them was letting a little girl play with stuff from her purse. The kid was in the process of putting a car key into an outlet. I said "no" so firmly, deeply, and clearly that I think every customer and coworker immediately had to check to see if they were the one getting in trouble. The ladies figured out immediately what was up, took the keys away, and thanked me. Story 11. Not a dad yet, but I think I have this when I play sports. I never noticed it until my girlfriend said something about how different my yelling was when I was playing goalkeeper compared to normal talking. Is this the dad voice? Deeper, stronger, and to the point? Story 12. Not a dad but an uncle. About 3 years ago my niece was maybe 5 and I was 16. We were at the old childhood home and she managed to run up the street going towards the corner store. Surprisingly, she got to the end of the street while we lived at the end of the cul-de-sac. As soon as I noticed her, I shouted in a way I hadn't before. Not even in Reserve Officers Training Corps did I ever sound the way I did. When I shouted her name from the back of my throat, my voice echoed with a deep boom across the cul-de-sac, which was mostly empty. She heard me and came running back to me while crying. I barely noticed in the moment because I was focused on her. But sometime afterward it really hit me that I did something like that without even knowing it or thinking about it. Story 13. High school party in my buddy's basement in 10th grade. Over 50 teenagers from different places were screaming, breaking things, and awkwardly hitting on each other. Then we got word from the host's parents that the police were on their way. I shouted at the top of my lungs, "Everybody, be quiet," and everyone fell silent. I had the authoritative voice at 16 and have taken advantage of it every chance I've gotten since realizing it. Story 14. I'm only 23, but I work in a hospital, so if I'm with an unruly patient, I use the dad voice, so they can stop moving for 30 seconds and I can get my electrocardiogram and leave. Story 15. When I first became a teaching assistant, I was asked to assemble the children in our class into a line at the end of break time. I started off by saying, "Okay, everyone, break time is over, line up," and expected them to quietly line up. Of course, some boys at the back were still messing around, so I tried getting their attention without raising my voice at first, to no avail. So I said, in a short, sharp bark, "Boys!" And they spun around and got into line. I felt bad for shouting at them, but I realized what a teacher or teaching assistant voice was that day. As we were heading in, I did say, "Sorry I raised my voice, but you knew break was over." And that was the end of it. Story 16. When my oldest daughter was around 3 or 4 years old, she was running around the house, making a mess and just not listening. Apparently, I was cleaning the kitchen at the time and had an empty paper roll tube in my hand. I raised it to my lips and in the voice of God said, "Stop." Immediately, my daughter stopped what she was doing, turned around, and looked at me. I started to laugh, then did it again. "Pick up your toys and brush your teeth." Like a robot with a switch turned on, she started doing what I asked. This worked for about a week. Then she realized the cardboard Wizard of Oz contraption had no real power over her. She went back to normal, but at the time I thought I had unraveled some secret dad hack. It was amazing. Also, apparently I need extra devices to get my dad voice to work. Story 17. First, 1 point for the Dune stuff. And, well, I always had a dad voice after my teen years. I couldn't speak discreetly in any classroom since I was 14. It's worthless in my family though because my dad and brother have the same. But anywhere else it's surprisingly efficient. An example. A friend of mine was debating with my girlfriend about politics. Classic Saturday for me. And at a point he said something over the line and everyone started yelling. I just put some bass in my voice and launched a "Hey." Everyone stopped. It was kind of nuts. Story 18. Long before I had my son, I was at the dog park and a puppy was being obnoxious to my older dog. So I turned and said, "Sit down now." Not only did the puppy listen, but most dogs and every child under 3 sat down. One adult woman turned to my girlfriend and said, "Wow, even I almost sat down." And all the adults started laughing. I think that was the first time I even heard the term dad voice. Story 19. 3 bigger kids were running quickly towards my 2-year-old son. They weren't paying attention and were about to knock him over. I heard my granddad's voice come out of my mouth. "Hey!" And all 3 of them froze in their tracks. Story 20. I, a 20-year-old female, discovered my mom voice while I was working concessions at a basketball game. 9 or 10 12-year-old boys came up and were all over the place, talking over each other. I said, "All right, I need you all to make a line right here if you want to order." I've never seen kids that age get organized so fast. Story 21. About 3 or 4 years ago, when I started volunteering at children's events at church, we would have about 40 or so kids attend and play around in the gym before the event started. The lady in charge can whistle really loudly, which usually gets the kids' attention. But if she isn't there, no one else is loud enough, so they struggle to gain everyone's attention in the gym. Rather than walk around and herd the kids, I just stood up and shouted. It was the first time my voice had echoed like that, and it worked, so problem solved. However, I think I've scared many kids who come because I'm known as the shouter. Story 22. When a person's voice comes from the diaphragm, you know that's when you need to listen. I like to call this the boss voice. You'll rarely ever hear a boss whisper orders to their workers. They have to be loud and commanding to reach everyone, especially if it's in a loud environment. Parenthood is much like a job. You have to keep the kids in check and out of trouble, so a commanding voice is essential. For adults, this type of speaking is seen as confident, strong, authoritative, and self-assured. It's also a very attractive quality for each gender, but only when it's necessary, like when a man needs to stand up for his woman and vice versa. People who stutter or have speech problems tend to speak quietly, whereas people with speech confidence speak loud and clear. It's just natural for them. The key is they don't shout. They raise it to a level that anyone in their proximity can hear. That's why we have microphones. Shouting too much injures the throat and makes your speech sound funny. Story 23. I use dad voice all the time when coaching my athletes. Nothing like hearing a room full of 100-kilogram-plus powerlifters say, "Yes, coach," and settling down. Any of those monsters could crush my skull with one hand, but the dad voice still works. Story 24. I was working in a bad neighborhood. The job I had didn't initially seem dangerous at first. I was in my early 20s at the time. I hadn't really experienced anything yet. I didn't like the job and was pretty horrible at it. Anyway, a knife was pulled. My brain shut off, and the dad voice came out. I'm still alive. Story 25. Don't have kids yet, but when my wife throws a tantrum, my calm but stern dad voice comes out. It gets her in line pretty quickly. I know she doesn't mind it because she gets quite touchy-feely afterward. Story 26. I was at work in a trampoline park. We had an ice cream fridge by the reception I worked on. I'd been by the lockers and was just walking back to the reception when I saw something that looked a bit weird. A group of 10 to 12 boys, all around 15 to 18 years old at a guess, had been in that evening. I noticed them all loitering near reception, and one of them had opened the fridge, been looking at ice creams, and then closed the fridge in a really shifty way. Like hid half his body, made furtive arm movements, that kind of thing. From the distance I was away, it looked like he'd stolen something. I wasn't exactly nearby, as I've said, so I thought I'd put on a louder voice. Project a bit more, you know. I said, "Are you going to pay for that?" The entire, and I mean entire, group of boys suddenly whipped around and looked at me. Conversations dead on the spot. The culprit looked like he was about to panic. He hadn't actually taken anything, just looked shifty. I was 21 years old at the time. Even the actual security guard looked impressed. Story 27. Don't know if it counts as a dad voice because I am only 20, but while playing field hockey, I managed to get two badly behaving men, one middle-aged with kids younger than me and the other a recently released 30-something former prisoner, to completely stop their squabbling over some stupid play from both of them. I walked between them, saying, "If it takes a 19-year-old to control you too, then you both need to go and sit down for a few minutes and think about how you should be acting." Story 28. I was in my late 20s and had been dragged to a new techno dance club, a level of my own personal hell. My wife's friend was in town visiting us, and she still thought she had just turned 21. We'll call her Becky. Well, Becky kept us at this club until around 3 a.m. while my wife and I were not having the best time. We prefer quieter bars where you can hear each other, and the drinks are better. When we finally go to leave, I called the ride service and was a bit annoyed by the 4-time surcharge, but whatever. The ride showed up and we started shuffling in until I noticed that Becky was nowhere to be found. I looked up and saw her drunk self at a pizza cart ordering pizza. The ride was blocking traffic to pick us up, and Becky had received her pizza but was trying to eat it and flirt with the 30-year-older pizza guy. So I just bellowed out, "Becky, get your ass in the car or we are leaving you." She reacted like a deer in the headlights. She dropped the pizza box and hesitated for a second before scooping it up and running. My wife still laughs about the first time my dad voice came out, and how it was prompted by feeling too old to be around all these darn kids. By the way, I don't have any kids. Just didn't have time for that nonsense.